was, well, if it's good for young people's mental health to not have this, what about the rest of us? I mean, and the Chinese talk about the mental health aspects of this too with their rules. If that mental health is so important and such a big influence on young people, then surely it's something all of us should be concerned about.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Bill Bennett joining us again. How are you, Bill?
I'm good, Paul.
Great to have you back in the studio again. For any listeners that aren't familiar with you, maybe you can fill folks in on where you fit into this big, bad world of tech.
Well, I've been a technology journalist for a long time now, probably 40 plus years now. And I still do some of that. I do some more general news reporting and business news and so on. And that's basically me.
Yeah, always good to get your thoughts and opinions on what's going on in the tech world, Bill. So looking forward to jumping in. Some pretty interesting topics on both a local sort of New Zealand front where we tap into a little bit of what's happening in the aerospace world, some other things locally in tech, and then some big global topics. And one of those relates to China, which could be a really big deal. So fascinated to hear your opinions on those. Before we go any further, though, a big thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark NZ, HP, and Gorilla Technology for their support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast and of course their involvement in the broader technology sector here in New Zealand. So first up, Bill, wanted to talk to you around the airspace integration trials and WISC. Now this sort of jumped to my attention in the last few days because WISC, who have been working on their autonomous air taxi technology now for probably well over a decade, sort of in total, since its early days, initial funding coming from one of the Google co-founders. But in a good turn of events, a chunk of their activity has taken place, and their testing taken place in New Zealand. But yeah, it jumped out to me that they were talking about their testing in New Zealand, and so the reference here from LinkedIn, it says Boeing's this is in a post by WISC, Boeing's Atlas program and QUT, Queensland University of Technology, recently developed a mid-air collision MAC risk model that is helping WISC and New Zealand aviation authorities move to a new phase of airspace integration testing. Now, this is the first sort of, I guess, public noise I've heard in recent times from WISC regarding their activities and work in New Zealand, because things have been reasonably quiet on their front, publicly for some time. And of course, when we heard that they were sort of setting up operations in New Zealand, in Queensland, there was that immediate thought: are they pulling out of New Zealand? What's left for New Zealand? Why wouldn't they just be doing everything in New Zealand? We're an awesome place to operate. But seeing that, I guess just encouraging that there are things going on, but also this talk around mid-air collision. Risk models and I guess all the technologies that go in around that. It's probably not an area we've really kind of delved into or thought a lot about. But realistically, if you're moving to drones that carry people around, you're going to need to get that stuff pretty right, aren't you? You can't afford to have things flying around and bumping into each other. And I mean, we're sitting here reasonably close to where there was a mid-air accident in Auckland city, probably 15 or so years back, where a helicopter and an aeroplane crashed that were observing the rush hour traffic. So there's a bit of encouragement there that things are still moving forward, and there activity happening in New Zealand. But I'd love to hear a bit more, to be fair.
Yeah, well, I'd like to know more about it. The technology, when you first think about it, it kind of resembles what's going on with autonomous cars, and then you think, well, no, actually, it's not, because cars travel on roads, whereas anything in the air, right? It's not only is it 3-dimensional, but you're not channeled down these narrow.
Where we're going, Bill, you don't need roads.
Well, no, you don't need roads, but there's a lot more space to play with. But then, of course, the consequences of anything happening are a lot more serious.
Yeah.
So, I was fascinated to know just how they're working on what they're doing, what kind of algorithms they're using, what are they looking for. I'd like to know all of this.
So anyway, encouraging to see New Zealand getting a mention. Interestingly, on their post, if you do follow them on LinkedIn and you click through on that, it took me a moment to realise. Then I was like, hold on, this is not new. So the post linked back to a press release from more than 2 years ago. Talking about them involved with New Zealand government's airspace integration trial program. So, I guess we'll wait. Hopefully we might hear a little bit more at the Aerospace Summit, which is coming up next month in Christchurch, following their Christchurch tech event. And I think they've also got a sort of innovation summit prior to that. So there's quite a bit of activity coming up as far as sort of tech and innovation in Christchurch in September. So we'll try and catch some of that, and maybe we'll be able to get some more insight into what Whisk are actually working on. Now, also from a New Zealand perspective, Bill, you read there was a Stuff article talking about new artificial intelligence technology to combat text scams.
Well, of course there is.
I mean, every other day somebody's putting out probably every other minute, somebody somewhere in the world is putting out a press release about how they're using AI to do something.
Well, I imagine that the other side's using AI as well. I'm pretty sure that the people doing the text scamming are up to their eyes in AI as well.
The scammers will be loving the AI. No longer are they, composing messages and sending them to us with all sorts of typos in them, and that spelling mistakes and so on. They can run them through their generative AI to help them out.
Look, it's a good idea. Obviously, anything that helps fight the scammers is a good idea. But I'm really wary about letting AI protect me in that sense, because first of all, AI will be algorithm based, so that the scammers will obviously they'll be playing a game of almost like a 3-dimensional chess between the two teams, the scammers and the defenders, and I wouldn't like to say which side I put my money on in that battle.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that people will have a false sense of security, perhaps, if they're being protected by AI, that only legitimate text get through, and that's when the real problems start. And most of us sort of seen one or two or a handful of text-based scams, but for a long time you didn't. So the very first one you got, you automatically assume it's legitimate because everything you've had up until that point was legitimate. It was only, in my case, it's only because it was just so glaringly wrong that I knew that it wasn't. But the second one I got was really quite incredible, because I was just in the process of doing my renewing the car license when I got a reminder about my car license by text.
Okay.
And I was actually doing it earlier that day. So it's pretty clear. Obviously, it's pretty clear. I mean, well, actually, my immediate reaction was perhaps it didn't go through. And then when I looked, I looked at the link, and the link clearly wasn't to any New Zealand government site. It was to some random thing overseas, so it didn't go any further. But that's the point. The point is they have that air of plausibility. The idea is to to come up with something and catch you off guard. And the problem with having an AI defender is that you're going to think, well, I'm being defended, I'm safe. And maybe you're not.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think we've got quite used to having a lot of sort of dodgy email blocked from our inboxes. If you certainly for those that are using any sort of reputable email provider of scale, they've usually got a pretty good ability to filter out the junk and the scams.
My email is actually the opposite. I have the opposite problem where I get a lot of press releases from companies which to the whatever is filtering my email looks like spam. So quite
looks
often,
pretty scammy, does it?
No, not scammy,
to the algorithm, it must sort of think there's something.
No, it's not
or
that.
just junk.
Some of the public relations professionals will use like emotive, words to the kind of words that scammers would use.
Right.
So if say for example a new product is being announced, they start talking about it being awesome and so on. Yeah. Well, that's the word that a scammer would use. So I guess that's part of it. So I'm getting a lot of false positives, I think.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. No, it's an interesting challenge. Now, depending on what platform you're on, today there is a level of blocking that we get on incoming calls if they're considered dodgy. And I notice that when I'm on an Android device, I notice that quite often that an incoming call it'll have an alert. So I think I see it ring once, and then it says, spam call or something like that, and then it kicks it to the curb. But both iOS and Android have capabilities for blocking and filtering, some calls and some messages. So there is a capability there, and I think there's an ability with some of those things to be able to install an app that that talks to that side of things to block things. So I think it's kind of natural that AI would be part of that picture for looking out for scams and spam and so on through text. Now also on the local front, 1NZ have launched their eSIM for wearables, or I should say they have finally launched their eSIM for wearables, because I remember chatting to Jason Paris about this probably some years ago now, and of course sort of COVID, the COVID period, there was all sorts of disruption. Looks like the way I'm picking it anyway is that they've done some sort of a marketing thing with Samsung, because they're launching it in conjunction with a Samsung Galaxy Watch 6. But if you've got the technology able to work with Samsung, you would expect them to be working with Apple probably.
Their announcement says that other watches will be added.
Yeah, so you imagine that's all going to happen in reasonably quick succession.
But I guess they'll need to give Samsung a clear run for so many months,
if that is indeed the case. Or we also know that from varying discussions that Apple have some often sort of specific requirements from a testing and integration perspective, and possibly that could take longer to run through as well. But I think it's great to see that we're getting more competition on that front. Interestingly, they're saying the eSIM for wearables will be free for the first 3 months, and then $5 a month thereafter for those on pay monthly or business mobile plans, which is quite a minimal extra cost to be able to add your wearable, right?
What would the margin on that be? The margin on that would be like very high because there's almost no cost to them to provide it. So yes, it's a good price, but it's a great margin.
But yeah, I'm thinking of wearables I've had, and in fact, I'm not going to rant at one of our show partners because all the telcos are our show partners, so I can pick on any of them at any time, which is great. And of course, they do all sorts of amazing stuff for New Zealand, and we love and appreciate them. But I was trying to disconnect. I was trying to work out how to disconnect an Apple Watch from a Spark plan over the weekend. Oh. And I've got 2 Apple Watches linked back to one of my Spark plans, and it was no problem to change the main Spark plan, but I couldn't see how I could disconnect one of those because, hey, most days I'm only wearing one watch, right? I might have 2 wrists, but one watch is enough for me. So it's probably just a matter of going into their live chat and asking them.
Trivial, but
it won't be a big deal. But I was like, why is it not here in the user interface? But
it's probably
one of those
obscure
enough things that isn't important enough for them to actually build it in. Because as you were talking, well, there's a low cost to running those, but it's not a high percentage of the population that needs to have a wearable plan. I'm sure that will keep increasing. Good to see more of that rolling. eSIMs just becoming the norm across the networks.
Well, it's interesting that I think in North America now, phones, pretty much all phones are eSIM phones. I don't think they have. I'm pretty sure that certainly all Apple phones no longer have the SIM slot. But I think that's starting to apply to all phones in North America now. So we'll be at that point quite soon, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's rather interesting because it reminds me of the days before GSM phones, because the exciting thing around, and I still remember the TV program Beyond 2000, that told us about this incredible new phenomena, the global system for mobiles, GSM, which, of course, all our networks are kind of a derivative of these days, and this idea that you could put this SIM into your phone, you could go into another country and just change in its SIM and so on, because before that your phone had to be kind of registered with the network. And in some ways that's what it feels like we're going back to with eSIMs. It's kind of like your phone is being connected with the network without the physical chip. So it's kind of funny how we go through these times. It's not that long ago
when all phones were network connected here in New Zealand.
All right, anyway, good things going on in the world of communications in New Zealand. Now let's talk about international. This news from the Cyberspace Administration of China is potentially huge, Bill. So they've proposed this draft policy that suggests limiting minors in terms of access to phones. Now, if we look in New Zealand homes, there is probably variances in different homes, whether it's a free-for-all, whether it's teaching youngsters to be responsible, easier said than done, I might add. Whether there are mechanisms to kind of block access to these devices. Then we've got school situations where often phones aren't allowed. So what we've got is a 2-hour limit for teenagers aged 16 to, it says over 16 and under 18.
Yeah.
And then for those who are between 8 and 16, they'd be limited to 1 hour of screen time.
Phone time.
Phone time on the phone screen time. And then children under 8, 40 minutes a day, and no one under 18 able to access phone screens between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.
There's also some restrictions over what different age groups can do. So I think young children are only allowed to watch, to enjoy, as they say in advertising, they're only allowed to enjoy movies and songs, and it changes with the age groups as well, the actual nature of what people can do. with their hour or their 2 hours or whatever. But yeah, it's quite strict. Well, for a start, my first thought on that is, well, you can tell that China is not a democracy. Yeah, because it'd be a really tough thing to get away with when you're a government that's got to be, when you're an elected government. This is the kind of thing you can do relatively easy if you're a totalitarian state. It's also, there's precedent for this in China because they have similar rules about young people playing video games. But we've got to remember that this what we're talking about, this is a proposal. It's not actually policy yet.
Yeah.
But the same organisation was the organisation which proposed the ban on playing video games for long hours, and that went through. So the chances are it will go through. There is some leeway, but there is if you dive down into the story, you'll see that there is some leeway for parents to
override.
Yeah. But it's not entirely clear how much of that. And the way it works in China is that quite often there's pressure for parents to not do that. That's not necessarily voiced. It's just there's that little bit of pressure in the background. It's quite drastic. The hour restriction is quite drastic. I mean, how many hours do you think you spend on a phone?
No comment, Bill.
Yeah. I don't spend that much when I'm working at home because I'm sitting. That's because I'm sitting in front of one of these things.
But we often tend to juggle our devices though too, don't we?
Yeah.
And I read something the other day, which it was actually quite head scratching to me. But this particular piece suggested that over 50% of the time that we spend on a computer is also spent on a mobile device. So it's like a lot of context switching and, my computer's doing this, I'll look at my screen. And maybe I misread it or misinterpreted it, but certainly, I mean, there are times it's like, I'll look at that while something is happening on say, my computer screen, but maybe more so when you're in front of TV type scenario, you'll look bits and pieces up and so on at times, but often the phone is just it's out of the way and not being used. So I was a little bit skeptical of those figures, but I guess that the sort of big question for me here, because there's, as you've said, certain regimes you can get things through that you might not be able to get through and to play in a democratic country, but what they're doing actually something that could make a big difference a generation or so from now? Do you end up building the type of youngster who is more balanced in different ways, whether it's social skills, thinking skills? There's a whole range of sort of downsides of spending too much time on a screen, at least for some people.
No, very much so. I think that's very much the case. I mean, the other story which you have on the list, which we were going to move on to, but I think is connected, is quite closely connected, is the UNESCO move. And UNESCO's recommended that schools ban mobile devices in school.
Globally.
Yeah, globally. Yeah. And that UNESCO is part of the United Nations. It's actually their cultural and educational body of the United Nations. And that recommendation is based off, there's been a lot of research, and it's the number one reason is because of they have evidence that the more kids use their phones and mobile devices during school, the less well they're doing at school, the less they're learning. They're being distracted, and they're not learning what they're at school to do.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Which is and so there are schools which ban these devices. They tend to have much better educational results than the schools that don't. So it starts to look like there's a pattern emerging. But the second justification that UNESCO mentions is that it's good for the mental health of young people. And so my immediate thought was, well, if it's good for young people's mental health to not have this, what about the rest of us? I mean, we don't have a sort of mental health switch that goes on and off at the age of 18. So clearly, there are mental health implications, or we know for sure there are mental health implications, not necessarily because of the phones themselves, but from the apps that are on the phones. So I mean, if you have a phone and you never touch Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Pinterest or any of those things, you may have better. It could be that those are the mental health problems rather than getting a text message from your mum telling you to meet her at the school gates. There are issues there. But if mental health, and the Chinese talk about the mental health aspects of this too with their rules. If that mental health is so important and such a big influence on young people, then surely it's influence on it's something all of us should be concerned about.
Yeah, there's a big impact, potentially if they land on something that makes a much broader impact on society. Now, whether it's the right way to mandate it, and if there was any suggestions down any of these tracks in New Zealand by any government, then nanny state and all these sort of terms would come out, and there would be there'd be all sorts of pushback. But if you sort of step back and look at, well, is there some wisdom to this? I think there's certainly wisdom to thinking around how we use technology, what technology we use, when we use it, is there right context, how we educate around good or appropriate and inappropriate use of technology. I mean, I think of my time as a teenager, and I spent a lot of time around a screen, a lot more than most, because a lot of homes didn't have computers at that stage, and we certainly didn't have smartphones at that point. In fact, I can remember, and I don't know whether this was a one-off case, but I remember maybe sleeping through a maths class because I'd been up so late the night before, whether I was coding or gaming or whatever at that stage. But mostly, I think my time on the screen was probably pretty good for me and set me up to move into the workforce quite quickly. But of course, that's not always the case. But there is that flip side to, hey, there's a downside of using the wrong apps and so on. But also there's the potential, well, if you've got kids that spend a lot less time on their devices, does that mean they never get beyond sort of games and things like that and into learning to code and the sorts of things that might give them job skills? So it's maybe not as, not super clear cut.
No, it's not. And by the way, the UNESCO recommendation is there are exceptions for some types of children. So there are exceptions if you're teaching technology, then you can use the devices. There are exceptions for certain types of disabled children who may need them. The thing that occurred to me when I was going through these stories was that it sounds like draconian, and but it could actually be benign. As you mentioned, it could be good for people. And so, what would be the right limit? Well, we don't know, do we? But I don't know. I'm slightly uneasy about the way that China's doing this. I don't like this. I don't like those edicts of that nature. It seems just a little bit too intrusive into people's lives.
Yeah, and this is where, in order to put those things in place, you have to have state-sponsored technology sitting across devices, and it gets very, very intrusive, and you facilitate more and more things that can be tied into a social scoring system, and as a parent, and we'll often see this in families. I know it's the case in mine. One parent will maybe be keener to limit screen time. Another parent will be like, no, you do what you like, and so on. So you could tie that back to scoring, and then you'll find one parent can't get to work because they've been too generous with their kids' screen time. It's impacted their social score, and they can't get on the train or something.
And you've also, the other thing I think is that I'm guessing, right, that I'm guessing the thinking behind this in China to a degree is that the kids that will spend less time with their phones, less time playing computer games, and more time with their heads in their books doing their studies,
But our books are our screens today.
Yeah, I know. But you know what I mean. I think they think that the kids will get on with their studies, right, rather than have fun with these devices and so on, right? But what if that's not what they do? What if they go out graffitiing or causing mayhem on the streets and so on? There's that aspect to it too. I mean, maybe that's how it works in China. Maybe they do regulate every moment of people's lives. Maybe that is what the thinking is. But I don't know. I can't see that working outside of a regime like China. I can't see that working in a Western democracy.
Well, we'll see how it plays out. But it does seem that often these things that get proposed in China will move through and come to be law. But it's one of those scenarios that probably takes a lot of years. After it is put in place, to see whether it has some sort of big impact on the economy, certainly.
It has already had an impact on the economy because the share price of all those Chinese tech companies plummeted on the news.
Oh, those selling kids games and
kids companies
apps?
like Tencent and the online companies, WeChat and Tencent.
Well, I guess there's an element of their businesses that are tied up very much in gaming.
And there's an aspect of this we haven't talked about, which I should perhaps mention, and that is that this isn't a sort of voluntary thing. There's going to be an app which you have on the phone. They're talking about something which they call minor mode. And minor mode is something which the phone manufacturers have to include in their phone's operating system to sell them in China. So it'll be on Apple's and Samsung's, and in China they'll still be buying Huawei phones. And it'll have this minor mode, and the minor mode is what regulates this. So it's actually hard-coded into the phone that it's being regulated. Well, that's actually an imposition on the phone. For a start, it's an imposition on the phone manufacturers, because you're starting to say, well, if you're going to sell phones in China, you've got to start putting these things into the operating system, which I think is possibly going to have an impact beyond. I mean, I can't see China saying, okay, well, we won't sell you any more phones, because the Chinese market is just way too big and too lucrative. But it is going to have an impact on those, on the industry. Around those things, it's going to have an impact on the Chinese phone companies. I mean, China Mobile, for example, are they going to have a plan which allows for kids to have 2 hours a day, as opposed to a 24-hour plan? I don't. Yeah, I can see problems there, and I can see also problems. Sorry, one more problem that I can see. I'm sorry to bash on about this, is that if, say, assuming that the kids are not going to be able to do this during school time, they can't do it from 10 p.m. or 6 a.m., that possibly means that the cell towers are going to be overloaded during the evenings when they are allowed on, because that's when they've got to concentrate all their use into those times. So there are implications which go way beyond the obvious in this.
It's quite fascinating when you peel back the layers. And look, there have already been things that have had to go into place, in China to, I guess, to please the regime there. And I think with AirDrop, which is sort of wireless, sharing capability on iOS. Apple were, I guess, put in a position where they adjusted how that sort of anonymous sharing might work in China, because it facilitated a level of sharing that the Chinese Communist Party, I'm picking, maybe weren't so keen on. So that could facilitate protests and
and also ban
riots
pictures of Winnie the Pooh as well.
Oh, you've got to ban Winnie the Pooh, Bill. No more English content.
No, it's not that. It's because Winnie the Pooh is a metaphor for the Chinese president.
Oh, okay.
So there are cartoons of Winnie the Pooh doing things, and you're meant to know.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Glad you explained that one. Yeah, so look, I think some interesting times ahead. There is the potential with some of these sorts of things that a government that doesn't have to sort of please or sway a voting public can put in place that in some cases could have some positive impacts over the longer term. Most of us that live in democratic countries are not going to be saying, hey, this is a good thing.
No, well, that's the two-hour thing, but with the school ban, Finland and Holland, or the Netherlands, I forget whether you call them Netherlands or
I think
Holland.
Netherlands these days. Netherlands these days. Part of Netherlands is Holland, isn't it?
Anyway, that they are bringing that in as a rule at during the next school term. Britain and France are considering implementing something similar, and some other European countries are looking at it too. At the moment, there's no plans to make that a law. It's just going to be like a recommendation or a rule or something.
As I think a lot of schools have today, right?
But yeah, exactly. A lot of schools are already doing that.
Yeah.
But they're saying in the Netherlands that it could become law if necessary.
Now, what do you make of Zoom asking their staff to return to the office? So this one, I think, has been a bit of a mind bender for those that have been reading the media coverage. That you think of, Zoom. Hey, if any company should be the absolute undisputed leaders of remote work, you would think Zoom might be that company, the flag bearer. But
the problem
no.
is that if Zoom is through this ruling telling the world that we can't make it work efficiently, that's saying terrible things about their product to their customers, isn't it?
I'm not sure it's so much about product. I mean, to me, it's about human nature, or it's about some people like to work remotely. Some people like to have the sort of camaraderie and socialness of being around, and they're calling it a structured hybrid approach, and they're saying that employees who live near an office need to be on site 2 days a week. So that's not crazy to me. No,
that's not crazy. It's not, and it's not too hard. But it's still a weird message to send to your customers, right? Because you are sending them a message saying, okay, for the last X years, we've been telling you how great remote working is. Yeah. And now we're telling you it's still great, but it's not so great that we're going to commit to it fully ourselves. And that's definitely a confused message to their market, if nothing else. Realistically, what you just described, and I've read the stories too, it's perfectly sensible. I mean, for people to be working remotely all the time, I mean, it's just not good for you anyway.
It depends where you are, doesn't it? And I think that the fact that they're taking that into account, because look, if you are 2 hours drive from an office,
well, it's 50 miles they say in America, and 50 miles probably is 2 hours.
Then there must come a point where the impact of that certainly as something to do every day, doesn't probably stack up that well, but there's value in still having the in-person type things, and I think most organisations have juggled that, and if they haven't found what's right for them, they're certainly on a journey.
I think it's perfectly legitimate to ask people to be in 2 days a week. I think it's actually quite sensible. But it's just odd that it's Zoom doing so, and it doesn't square with their sales pitch.
Okay. Now, this is probably the big story. Everyone didn't really think we were going to talk about it, Bill.
Oh.
And, but we have to. Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk. It kind of looks a little bit like Musk, could be a no-show. There's a date of August the 26th that Zuckerberg has proposed. Musk is saying, well, he's lifting some weights while he's working.
Yeah.
Big age difference, big challenges. What would it do for the tech world if we had a Zucker punch on Musk and it took him out? He was no longer able to lead his companies.
Well, he runs Twitter like he's punch drunk already, doesn't he? But seriously, it's pathetic that their egos should come to this.
It's a bizarre thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it just is. I mean, could you imagine Bill Gates going head-to-head with Steve Jobs? No, it wouldn't have happened, would it?
Not in public anyway.
No.
I mean, possibly under certain circumstances, something like that could have happened in a private setting. But
sure,
probably not. I'm exaggerating there too.
It's silly, but it's a silly story by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, and but the thing about this that absolutely gets me is that Zuckerberg is 13 years younger than Musk. I think we worked it out. He's 52.
39 versus 52.
Yeah. He certainly looks like he's a lot fitter and able to come. And apparently he's been doing martial arts for years. What happens if they really do have a serious fight? And I mean, it's as you say, it's quite possible that one of them could end up unable to do anything afterwards. These things do end up that way. It's not a good look for either company, really.
I was just looking up when George Foreman had his sort of second go at being the world heavyweight champion. Champion. The battle of the ages. Evander Holyfield versus George Foreman. Looks like he was about 40. So a very big difference.
It's one thing to be 40 in your 40s and be a professional boxer. It's another thing to be in your 40s and be someone who's sat behind a desk pretty much for the last 20 odd years.
Oh, it was 45. So that he didn't. So it was actually 45 that he beat Michael Moorer to become the oldest heavyweight champion of the world. But still, Musk's well past that. So
and it's not like he's been spent the last 20 years in a gym, is it? So, I don't know. I don't think it's going to end well. But I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, "What do you think is going to happen with Elon Musk?" And I don't think Elon Musk's story is going to end well. I think he will probably end up. I think his story will end with him being rich still. But I just don't think he's a happy man, and I don't think his story's going to end well.
Well, riches aren't always the answer to happiness, are they? So we will leave it at that. It's been great to catch up, Bill, and I will still watch if there's a fight on. I don't know about a pay-per-view. I'm not sure I'd be paying for a fight like that, but anyway, it's some sort of twisted
Would it be on Sky?
Form of entertainment if it were
Sport?
on.
I don't think it will be on Sky Sport.
It's just bizarre that we're even talking about this, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is so such an odd thing. But anyway, we will see how it plays out. But they've certainly got us talking about them yet again. These tech bros, tech billionaires, whatever you want to call them. Well, thanks for joining us again on the New Zealand Tech Podcast, Bill.
You're welcome.
Where should people be looking to see your latest content? You've got
billbennett.co.nz is my site. I now do a weekly newsletter every Friday, which is probably the bulk of what goes on the site now.
Yeah, great.
There's usually stories during the week, but that's the big day. I'm kind of hanging on Twitter. I don't really spend much time there anymore, but I'm playing with some other things. I've been trying out something called T2, which is a Twitter replacement, which is really nice, but it just doesn't have the reach or the size that Twitter had. And I've also been looking at something called Mastodon as well, which is same thing really, but Mastodon's odd.
Oh, well, we know where to look out for you anyway. So thank you for that. And, of course, thank you to our show partners, to Gorilla Technology, HP, Spark, 2 Degrees, and 1NZ. We really appreciate their support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. And just a reminder, if you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure that you've got access to get alerts around the live stream, which most weeks we do tend to live stream. So you can get that through X. We have an NZ Tech Podcast handle on X, previously known as Twitter.
Are we actually calling it X now?
Well, I'm trying to get used to this new name, even though it's still at twitter.com, isn't it?
Yeah.
Also on YouTube, so you can find NZ Tech Podcast on there, on Facebook, and for the LinkedIn stream, you can find that just by following myself, Paul Spain, on LinkedIn. And of course, if you're watching the video, go and find a podcast app, whether it's Spotify or something else, and you'll be able to follow and subscribe free to NZ Tech Podcast there. All right, we'll catch you again next week, and thanks again, Bill. Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.